The order of business will be public bills, second reading, public bills, third reading, and private and local bills for second and third reading as well, and committee of the whole House on bills. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now rise.
Motion is the House adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned till 12 noon tomorrow. We've reached the moment of interruption. The evening for this subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to speak tonight on the resolution, be it resolved that MLAs and all Nova Scotians recognize the importance of private land conservation in the province and the work being done by the Nova Scotia Environment and Labour to encourage private land stewardship, such as the Panuke Lake Nature Reserve, owned by Bowater Mersey Paper Company, and the Brothers Islands off the coast of Parsborough. Mr. Speaker, just a little background. Environment and Labour is responsible for the planning and management of Nova Scotia's protected wilderness areas, nature reserves, and also the heritage rivers. And through our Protected Areas branch, we're also responsible for supporting and encouraging the protection of natural areas through private stewardship. And private stewardship is a very important complement to the government's own conservation efforts. To date, we've designated 31 protected areas, and these areas represent typical examples of Nova Scotia's natural landscapes, our native biodiversity, and outstanding natural features. And we'll soon add 2 more to the list, Gully Lake and Ag Mountain, both in northern Nova Scotia. And the province has 7 nature reserves that were designated under the Special Places Protection Act. These land holdings are important areas for biodiversity protection, scientific research, and education. We also have 2 waterways designated as heritage rivers, the Shelburne and the Margaree Lake Ainslie River systems. And this designation celebrates these rivers as travel routes, recreational areas, and certainly part of our livelihood. And Mr. Speaker, you might ask why it's important to, that we protect and conserve private lands. Nova Scotia in itself is a very special place, and it's our job to ensure that we protect the areas that represent different types of biodiversity in the province. We have over 10,000 kilometers of coastline, and the province supports at least 6,000 species of plants and animals and hundreds of distinct habitats. Currently, more than 8% of the province is protected from resource extraction and industrial and residential development, but less than 0.1% of the area is formally protected on private land. Over 70% of Nova Scotia is privately owned. So there's a huge opportunity, I believe, to increase that number from private land. Protecting our natural areas for future generation depends in part on the interest and commitment of landowners and others to conserve this private land. We have some examples of private land conservation. The department has been working hard with other agencies and conservation organizations to encourage private land stewardship, and we're starting to see the results. Today in this province, we have at least 12 areas where private landowners have played a role in helping us protect land in Nova Scotia. For example, the Panuke Lake Nature Reserve, owned by Bowater Mersey Paper Company, is designated under the Special Places Protection Act. The Rhines Creek Salt Marsh was donated to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, and most of the southeastern end of Briar Island was acquired in 1987 through a partnership that included the province and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And there are some options, Mr. Speaker, for protection. There are many options available for landowners to access if they want to protect our natural ecosystems, and I'd like to point out just 4 of those options that offer different benefits based on the needs of landowners. One is designation. A landowner can permanently protect their land by having it designated under the Special Places Protection Act or the Wilderness Areas Protection Act. This involves a written agreement that is legally binding but gives the landowner the option to maintain land ownership. It's the strongest form of protection available in Nova Scotia and has the advantage of making the government responsible for enforcing the legislation. There's donation, Mr. Speaker. A landowner can donate land to a conservation organization or a government agency. Groups like the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and our own Protected Areas program all welcome this type of gift. When donating land, landowners can receive a charitable donation receipt for the market value of the land. As well, landowners can often negotiate uses and restrictions with the organization or agency that they're dealing with. There's also a conservation easement, and a conservation easement is a very good option for landowners who want to restrict future development. They can restrict the future development on their land without selling or donating it. It allows the landowner to put an agreement in place with a conservation organization that would apply to current and future landowners because it's tied to the title of the land. The one drawback of this option is that it could reduce the market value of the land, but I believe in time it will act as something that will increase the value of the land. Also, there's straight-out acquisition. The cost of purchasing all critical areas in the province for protection from development far exceeds the limited financial resources of both government agencies and conservation organizations. And in some cases, however, it is possible to purchase significant natural areas from private landowners. A good example of this is Cape Split, which was acquired by the province in 2003. So what do we really gain by protecting private land? Landowners who protect their land help to protect natural ecosystems and certainly the beautiful scenery that we all enjoy. All Nova Scotians can benefit as these areas can remain open for recreation such as walking, hunting, fishing, and birding. They can provide important areas for scientific research, and intact natural areas help moderate our climate. They certainly provide oxygen, they absorb carbon dioxide. Natural lands also control floods, purify our water, absorb pollution, and provide us with areas of beauty, tranquility, and spiritual refreshment. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say that we look forward to preserving more lands in the future and working with private landowners to ensure that we have nature that will be here forever for our grandchildren and their grandchildren to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognized all member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Track my time, Mr. Speaker. Do I have 10 minutes? Yes. Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, in listening to the Minister of Environment's comments, I would agree that it's a very important issue, that what we have to do is continue to protect the various areas in Nova Scotia. One of the things he did mention as a fact was, I believe he said that 8% of the land in Nova Scotia is protected. That's private land. That's not a very large number, but it is one of the reasons why it is important to continue along this line. He did give some examples of some private land stewardship, and certainly these are all very important to all of us in Nova Scotia. The various options that are available for private landowners to partake in, the designation of land, they can donate the land, and the conservation easement and acquisition by the province itself. These are all very important, and certainly for the reasons that the Honourable Minister of Environment mentioned, that benefit all of us as far as research, recreation, providing clean air, water, and of course the beauty of it all. But after saying that, I'm going to take a different route, and what I'd like to talk about, because he's done such a good job on that, is take a different spin on the topic, which is I'd like to talk for a few seconds about the Green Plan and sort of the lack of some of the negative things I saw in that when I went through it, Mr. Speaker. And some of the issues that came up when I look at that is that, in fact, the plan itself was disheartening to myself and many people that contacted me through email and various other means. A lot of people felt that where the plan should have given stronger commitments and regulations, there was only vague promises to promote, encourage, and lead by example. It was lacking in identification of responsibilities, timetables, and compliance were covered in sort of a sketchy fashion. There was a real need for more public consultation on that, and as I say, it should have been followed through with stronger regulations. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, we'd like to talk about our protected areas in Nova Scotia. And that's the topic we're talking about, but it's such a broad issue. Right now, I believe in Nova Scotia, you know, if we're going to talk about private land, we have to also, we can't look at that as a separate context. We have to look at it in the context of our Crown land. Because right now, 80% of our Crown land has no protection in Nova Scotia. That's a large portion of land that's going with no protection whatsoever. And in fact, in 1992, the province was to establish a protected areas, the distinct natural regions in Nova Scotia, which I believe there were 80 of those, which were actually supposed to be represented, or they were hoping to have them represented in the future. My understanding in talks throughout the budget was that, and I may have my numbers wrong, but I think we've only actually represented 31 of those up to this point. And I don't believe anything new has been added since 1997. So I know the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour did mention that Gully Lake and Egg Mountain would soon be added into that batch, and I know the government did put them forward as candidates. So we're looking forward to those moving through the system and becoming protected wilderness areas. Certainly we do need to come up with some kind of a clear process to identify and establish our protected areas in Nova Scotia, and so that we can protect them from things like mining, which close to their boundaries, and the destruction which we know happens with some of our ATV users in some of these areas. So I'm hoping that the province will complete that network and do the best to do that. We have to have just more than isolated pockets of protected areas, I believe. That's what most people feel. There's a question of when we're going to move forward on that. So I'll keep up the battle from this side of the floor in reminding the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour that, you know, we're going to keep on keeping up on those issues. I do have some concerns, and I'd like to voice some of them here today. And I, in fact, just had a discussion a few minutes ago with the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour about the Tobeatic Wilderness area. And so that, of course, Mr. Speaker, we all know is quite a large piece of land, 250,000 acres, and it has the potential to be the last true wilderness area, you know, in the Maritimes. So it's very important that we continue to move on really a positive level with that. And I have to say, you know, I'm in communication with the Minister of Environment and Labour on that issue, and he's certainly willing to provide me with the most updated information on what the government's doing on that, and I have to thank him for that. The Tobeatic Wilderness Area contains the headwaters of 9 watersheds. I mean, it's a remote area, it's pristine, and there has been some motorized impact there, Mr. Speaker, and I think the government is, you know, I'm hoping is going to do their best in the upcoming draft guidelines that they'll put further protections on that area. So, you know, I guess we don't want to compromise on that piece of land, and in fact, we probably should be expanding that whole area of land, if you look at it that way. There were concerns, and I have voiced them here before, about the infringement of a mining, a black bull mine, to be specific, on the Tobeatic Wilderness Area, and that is a continuing concern for a lot of the people that are on the Tobeatic Wilderness in that area, and that live around there and that use that area. They certainly were not happy to see Black Bull Mine move in with just within a few meters of that protected wilderness area. They're worried that the mine would cause, you know, extensive changes to the water table there in the lakes and surrounding streams. So one of their issues that they continued to bring up with me was that there never was a full environmental study done on that area, and that they're afraid that whole issue is going to set a precedent for the future of all of our protected areas in Nova Scotia, and I would have to agree with them on that. They did feel that there were some flaws in the decision-making process, and I know various people on the committee that went forward with the government dropped out and then came back on. So I'm happy to see that they did come back on board, and I'm hoping, again, that there'll be a very positive outcome to all of that in the end. And Mr. Speaker, I would like also to talk a little bit about, if we're talking about protected wilderness areas and we're talking about protecting private land and we're talking about protecting Crown land, then I think, we have to talk also about the issue of clear cutting in Nova Scotia, and that we know that approximately 95% of the wood harvested in Nova Scotia does come from clear cutting. So I think it is an issue that is within this topic of discussion. We've doubled, I think, the timber cut in the last 20 years, and we've doubled the area clear cut in the last 10 years. And there is an issue revolving around that as far as the amount of jobs that are provided in that industry, if they're sustainable, if there's less jobs than there were before. And we know right now that there's less than 1% of old growth left in Nova Scotia. And that's a sad number to look at. So, I'm hoping that the government will be supporting forestry operations that are going to promote a more sustainable method of that economic development. And I'm not sure how much money, the government has invested in silviculture in the province, or if that amount has gone down. I believe it may have in the last few years. So I'll be very interested to see what the government does in the near future when they are going to address indiscriminate clear cutting, Mr. Speaker. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot of what I'm going to have to say has probably already been covered, and some by the Honourable Minister himself. I will get to a point where I would like to clarify something for me. But as was stated, there's 70% of the land in Nova Scotia is owned privately, and with so much land in private hands, the role of individual landowners in protecting our natural areas is extremely important. Protected Areas branch of his department supports private land stewardship in many ways, and I'd just like to touch on a few of those. They conduct studies of selected sites and sharing inventory information with private landowners and other interested parties. And they work in developing the legislation and programs to facilitate private land protection. They also provide information and assistance to landowners and land conservation organizations, and one of those would be the Protecting Private Land brochure, working directly with landowners to protect their significant natural areas through designation under the Wilderness Areas Protection Act and the Special Places Protection Act. They work as a member of the Provincial Private Land Conservation Enhancements Committee and helping to identify barriers and disincentives to private land conservation in Nova Scotia and make recommendations on how to improve the climate for private land conservation initiatives. They also work with the Nature Conservancy of Canada in various programs, including Campaign for Conservation, a partnership that was formed in November 2000 to preserve ecological and natural areas in the province, Mr. Speaker. They also work in partnership with the Nova Scotia Nature Trust on a variety of conservation projects aimed at securing ecologically significant areas on private land. The Protected Areas Program, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Environment and Labour's Protected Areas Branch is also responsible for planning and managing Nova Scotia's protected wilderness areas and nature reserves, as well as heritage rivers. The Protected Areas Branch is also responsible for supporting and encouraging the protection of natural areas through private stewardship. This is done in various ways, such as conducting studies of selected sites and sharing inventory information with private landowners and other interested parties, developing legislation and programs to facilitate private land protection. Providing advice and assistance to landowners and land conservation organizations, working directly with landowners to protect their significant natural areas through designation under the Wilderness Areas Protection Act. Also, Mr. Speaker, they have the Special Places Protection Act, and through purchase, donation, or conservation easement, identify barriers to private land conservation and improving the climate for private land conservation initiatives. They also work with organizations like the Nature Conservancy of Canada and the Nova Scotia Nature Trust on a variety of conservation projects aimed at preserving natural areas in the province, working in close partnership with the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and other government agencies. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to touch on the Panuke Lake Nature Reserve, which is located along the shores of Panuke Lake in Hants County, on lands owned by the Bowater Mercy Paper Company Limited. It consists of 150.9 hectares, and it has an old-growth hemlock spruce forest. The reserve protects an old-growth eastern hemlock red spruce forest, a remnant of a once common forest type in Nova Scotia. And the reserve is located in the South Mountain Rolling Plain natural landscape. The old-growth portion of the reserve is approximately 47 hectares in size, and is surrounded by a buffer zone of 104 hectares. Because of the extreme present-day rarity of this type of forest, access is limited, Mr. Speaker, and requires permission of Bowater Mercy and the Nova Scotia Environment and Labour Protected Areas Branch, which is good to see. The Honourable Minister mentioned the Brothers Islands, the donation of coastal lands. Two steep-sided basalt islands sit about a kilometre offshore from Parsborough in the Bay of Fundy, and by foot they are accessible at low tide only, Mr. Speaker. And at times, strong currents isolate them from the mainland. Having largely escaped human influence, the larger of the two islands harbours a very rare phenomenon: 5 hectares of old-growth hardwood forest situated right next to the ocean. The rich soils also support a number of unusual plants, including purple trillium and Canada yew. The smaller island, about 1 hectare in size, is covered by trees atop 10-metre-high cliffs. This island hosts nesting bald eagles, common eiders, red-breasted mergansers, black guillemots, and great black-backed and herring gulls, Mr. Speaker. These two islands, known as the Brothers, had been in Jack Herbin's family for almost a century. His grandfather, John Herbin, was a jeweler by trade and was a keen naturalist and rock collector. In 1898, he bought these two gems from the province, Mr. Speaker, for the large sum of $25. Every summer, he and his wife would take a ferry from Wolfville to Parsborough and spend several weeks exploring the islands, collecting rocks and observing the plants and animals. At night, they would camp on the mainland. In 1995, Jack Herbin permanently protected the Brothers Islands by donating them to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, a very worthwhile deed, in fact. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned that I would be asking the Honourable Minister a question, and it's for information only, and I'm sure the Minister will try and respond to that, and he has nodded yes. I have a map in front of me, Nova Scotia's Protected Areas Program, and there's 31 wilderness areas, Pollett's Cove, Aspie Fault, which is in an area that I represent, Marguerite River, Jim Campbell's Barrens, French River, Sugarloaf Mountain, Middle River and North River, Trout Brook, Middle River Framboise, Gabaroos, Scattery Island, Ogden Round Lake, Bonner Lake Barrens, Canso Coastal Barrens, Liscombe River, the Big Bog, Alder Ground, Boggy Lake, Tangier Grand Lake, White Lake, Clattenburg Brook, Waverly Salmon River Long Lake, Terrence Bay, Economy River, Portapique River, Cloud Lake, McGill Lake, Lake Rossignol, Tobiatic, Tidney River, and Bowers Meadows. Now, Mr. Minister, wilderness areas, I'm wondering, are they protected areas or are they just designated wilderness areas? There must be a designation or a difference, because something that's protected, these are not named as protected areas. They're named as wilderness areas. And so, is there any protection that comes to these areas because they're designated wilderness areas?
Minister of Environment and Labour, if you would like to respond.
There certainly is a level of protection that's afforded them that wouldn't be afforded other things. I believe it was 1998 when the protected areas legislation went through. At that point in time, it designated that there would be no motorized access on those areas. Now, since then, there have been management plans that have been developed, and the Tobiatic Management Plan is currently under review out in draft form, and historical usage has been maintained during that period of time till a group takes a look at those individual areas to find out what should happen there, and we certainly want the areas, the community's sort of commitment and involvement in that. But there is a large level of protection on all of those areas, and I could get the specifics and make sure that we get it to the honourable member.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for that information. I asked that for two reasons. Like I said, there isn't enough protected spaces. I don't believe there's always been a request for more protected spaces. And also, as you're quite well aware of the ATV problem that we're having with around the province, and the policy that's hopefully going to be adopted by the province with some amendments. But there's a lot of the industry is not going to go away. There's over 100,000 machines in the province. There is damage being done, but there is good work being done by organized clubs and people who utilize these vehicles for their work and for recreation, and an awful lot of family recreation come out of these. But it seems that the negative impact of the damage that is what seems to be get the ink in the media, and I'm hoping that we can, when that comes forward, that we're successful in resolving it to everyone's satisfaction. And I was just wondering if where you basically answered my question in the fact that you said there was no motorized vehicles in any and all of these areas.
Not legally.
Not legal. I'm sorry. Not legal. Not legal. So then, a measure of policing or supervision of some kind could be hopefully developed because there is existing regulations there now that, like I said, legal activity is not allowed in those areas of a motorized vehicle.
Order, please. The honourable member's time has expired. Thank the honourable members for taking part in this debate this evening. A very important debate, and thank the honourable members. The House is adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow.